So here we go. Tonight we are going to work on color correction, and I've provided everybody with a whole bunch of samples of footage from Pexels that we're going to color grade. Well, we're going to correct it first, and then we're going to color grade it. And then you're going to show the difference between your raw footage and your color graded footage and the steps that you took to get there. So first what we're going to do is we're going to look at the overview, because it's handy to have that bad boy in the lecture from what I'm finding out. All right, so color correction tonight. Tonight's lecture, you're going to learn some techniques for color grading in After Effects. Your assignment for next week is as follows. Shoot or photograph a minimum of 6 to 10 shots and color correct them using After Effects. After you've color corrected them, use After Effects to show the change in your shots from raw footage or photo to color corrected footage by using layer visibility masks and other techniques to go from raw to fully color corrected footage. Compile each shot into a 1-minute long color correction reel and present it to class. Requirements: shoot and color grade 6 different 10-second shots in After Effects using After Effects color correction tools. Use layer solids, masks, and effects to amp up certain areas of the footage. Create a 1-minute color grading reel from all 6 of your shots, showing the progression from raw footage to final color grade. And then upload your AEP file and your .mov file to D2L with the following naming convention: last name underscore first name underscore A07. So, that all being said, it's pretty straightforward. You guys need to use your own footage or your own photos for this. You can use photos. I would highly recommend you use video footage rather than photos. You can shoot this on pretty much anything. If you have an iPhone, it shoots beautiful 4K at 30 frames per second. Some suggestions: make sure that you have it on sticks or a tripod, or it's steady or something like that, so your footage isn't just a bunch of garbled junk all over the place. Shoot something that's well lit and is interesting to look at. So that could be somebody performing an action of some sort, it could be outside, it could be inside. You just want to shoot good looking footage that will lend itself well to color grading. And you want it to be relatively steady. That's another thing that's important about shooting nice footage. So you can shoot handheld, but if you're say using a phone or something like that, just make sure you're thinking about your composition, you're thinking about your shot, make sure you have a nice broad range of colors in your footage. It really helps to have something that's white and something that's black in your footage, so you have a reference point for those two colors so that you can color correct well. On footage that doesn't have good whites and good blacks, it's hard to kind of correct those without those references. It's certainly doable, but it gets a lot more subjective. So those are the kind of guidelines. I would say pick your best stuff to color grade. This will be a nice addition to your reel if you do a good job on it, but you just want to use good, pretty shots. Lots of students in the past that were successful at this went out and shot their own stuff on an A7S or something with a good lens that shoots a log color space so that you can color correct log footage, which is generally the way that it works in the world of anything production. So those are kind of the guidelines for shooting. And when you look at the footage that we're looking at today, I've kind of picked these shots out because they're vastly different. There's different skin tones and things in them. There's different colors. Some of them are of people. Some of them are of objects. And we'll go through, and first what we'll do is we'll correct the footage, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start learning some techniques for applying grades to your footage. So those are two different things. Does anybody have any questions straight away?
Well, I have this old Canon camera, and I could
After Effects has a bunch of cool tools built into it. You can use a lot of the stuff that's over here in the color correction tab to do your color grading. Like curves is one where we would use a ton. Hue saturation is another one that we can use. Levels is another one that we can use. There's all kinds of great color correction tools right inside of After Effects. And then one of the other ones that I like to use in After Effects is called SA Color Finesse. So if you type in SA Color, you can see SA Color Finesse, Synthetic Aperture Color Finesse 3, which is a powerful kind of standalone color correction tool that you can use within After Effects. So we're going to learn how to kind of use all those different tools tonight. And so color correction and color grading are two different things, right? So what do you think color correction is? Go ahead, Connor.
Color correction is just making sure it all looks natural, and say you have two different colored light, like you shoot in two different locations, you try to get them to look like they were shot in the same lighting.
Right. So correction is really more balancing than anything else, right? It's making sure that your white is actually white and your black is actually black. And on most cameras, most lenses, pretty much anything, even red footage, has got some sort of like color bias to it, right? So depending on what lenses you use and what camera you use, sometimes the footage will have like a magenta bias or a green bias, and you'll like the job of color correction is going through and taking all that footage and making it so that it's even across the board. You got white white and black black. That's pretty much what it boils down to. And then after you've got everything balanced, you can go in and actually start creating color grades, which is totally different. That's where you give it a unique and stylistic look, right? And lots of, like, does anybody have a great example of a film that they really love the color on? Yeah, go ahead.
The Shining.
Okay, cool. That wouldn't have been done digitally. That would all be done using film process.
Yes.
Still, that
Would-
wouldn't put that count.
I mean, I'm sure that Stanley Kubrick had input on color when they processed the film. But yes, I mean so that's called color timing when it's film.
Yeah.
So if it's film, they have to go through and they actually have to utilize like different levels of chemicals and things like that to get all of the stock to look the same. So with film, it's a whole nother animal. So digital is totally different than film process. Film process is done all chemically, whereas now it's all done either with a digital intermediate. If it's shot on film originally, they'll take all the film stock, scan it all in at high resolution. They'll create digital files out of it, and then they'll do all the color work on those digital files.
Another thing that could probably count as well would be either one of my favorite movies.
So you should already be pretty much where I'm at right now. So I've got my sample images or my sample footage pulled in with my main comp set up. I've got a couple of asterisk stars in front of the folders and stuff that I want to keep on top of my stack in the project window, just to keep everything nice and organized. So per the assignment, we're supposed to grab 10 seconds of 6 shots. You can shoot more than 6 shots if you want to. You can do 10 or 12, but I'd like you to pick the very strongest 6 and then pick 10 seconds of each of those, and then create compositions from those where you'll do your color work, and then you will basically show the change from your raw footage to the finished color graded footage. So let's go ahead and look at our footage real quick. So let's just start with building above the clouds. So this is a nice shot, it's kind of abstract. It's got obviously a lot of white and black in it, which is good. And it gives us a lot of options for color grading. So there's a lot of different ways that we can take this footage to make it feel a certain way, right? Like that's what is honestly really exciting about color correction and color grading, is it allows you to give your footage mood, right? And that's exactly what they were doing with Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? They wanted it to feel dry and dusty, and you can't make something feel dry and dusty if all of your leaves are bright green and everything looks lush and rich. So this shot will give us some opportunities to kind of create mood, which is really nice. Let's look at couple walking on the beach. So this couple walking on the beach shot is just kind of your standard deal. I think it's a drone shot. Oh, that's fun. Okay, good. Yep, we were just scrubbing through this. So this is pretty simple. We've got some good white clouds in the backgrounds where we can kind of use those to balance our image a little bit. We've got the black on their clothing, which we can use to balance the image a little bit, and bring a little bit more richness to these shots. The nice thing about these shots is they're very flat, so they're kind of desaturated. There's a lot of dynamic range. There's no real hot spots or anything like that in the footage, which is really nice. So these will color grade really nicely. Motorcycle on highway. You can tell the difference just between switching between couple walking on the beach and motorcycle on the highway. These are two vastly different shots. The black areas in this image are very red, so we'll be working on balancing the blacks and the whites out in this image so that we can get a nice balanced image from which we can take and we can grade further. If you scrub through it, you can just see there's a little bit of action. Sky's pretty blown out. There might be some stuff that we can do with that as well if we want to stylize this shot a little bit more. Shoes on the street. Shoes on the street's pretty simple. This is a very monochromatic shot, so there's some opportunities here to kind of create some more color or create some more interest in this shot. We've got really good whites and blacks to use to balance this shot as well. So this one should work pretty well. Girl smiling in the snow. This is a very lovely shot. So it looks like it was shot slow motion. It's nice and soft and flat. It'll give us a good base to kind of create a nice color grade from. And this one's not even 10 seconds long, so we'll time remap it a little bit to make it the duration that we want it to be. Woman in sunglasses. This is just a nice shot of a woman wearing sunglasses, but again, there's good contrast in this, highlights and lowlights, which we can balance out and will provide a really good base for creating a color grade. We'll pick the best 10 seconds of each shot and start laying them together. So let's start with building above the clouds. So let's take building above the clouds, and then let's double click on the footage so that we're in the footage panel, and let's go in and pick out our 10 favorite seconds. So I'm just going to kind of scrub through this and see what it looks like. I don't really want the clouds to come up over the buildings, so I'm going to back this up a little bit, and I think I'm just going to take the first 10 seconds of this shot. So I'm just going to set an out point at 10 seconds in, and the in point will just be 0 seconds, and that'll be what we color correct. So let's take this shot and let's make a new composition from it. So let's take building above the clouds and drag that file, now that we have our in and our out set, down to the little composition tab inside the project window and let go, and it will create a new composition with the proper footage. Do you need the footage back there?
I do, yeah.
All right, give me 1 second.
Thank you.
You're viewing in frames down here. I believe you just hit the option key and click it, or double click it. Maybe it's command. Yeah, command. So if you command click that, you can go from frames to seconds. All right, so is everybody with me so far? So most of this footage is 1080p. I think there's only one shot in here. Yeah, a couple walking on the beach is 4K, but everything else is 1080p. And it looks like there's some variability in terms of frame rates too. There's a couple that are 23976 and there's a couple that are 2997. That shouldn't make a huge difference. So we're just going to create the comps 10 seconds a piece, and we'll drag those comps onto our main comp at the end to do a layout of all 6 of our shots. Okay. So let's just start balancing this shot. So what we're going to do is we're going to save everything. So make sure you save your project after you just kind of get some things started. And then let's move the After Effects workspace into color instead of the standard mode. So you can do this a couple ways. Go up to Window, Workspace, and click on Color, and it will change the layout to a color grading layout rather than the standard layout.
Quick thing, where do I was trying to figure out like how to put the footage onto composition, but now it's not working.
Okay, so you just use the project panel here. Take your footage once your ins and your outs are set and drag it onto this little composition tab down at the bottom of the project window. You can also, I believe, right click and say New Comp from Selection, and that will create a composition as well.
Can you repeat that process again with how you get the red, blue, green thing?
So we're changing from the standard default layout to the color layout. So you can go to Window, Workspace, and click on Color. The other thing you can do is there's this little tab right here with 2 arrows on it. You can see there's a bunch of workspaces right here. You can click there and set it to color as well. So that will give you scopes, which is great. So we're going to learn more about the scopes tonight as well. All right, so has anybody used scopes to do any color grading or color correction in the past? No.
Might have, but probably not noticed.
Okay, so there's a bunch of different options. So if you right click in here, you can see your different options. So we've got waveform RGB, which is what's selected right now. Let's go to Parade RGB. Parade is the one that I use really the most to work color correction because it shows you the different channels of the video. according to their color strengths, right? So if you're trying to balance blacks, whites, things like that, you will see those represented on the parades, and then you can use those parades to balance your images. So make sure you right-click on that and then select Parade RGB, and then to shut off the waveform, you can just uncheck the waveform, so that we're just working with the parades right now. There's several other scopes in here too, like the vector scopes, which kind of show you the strengths and saturations of your colors, and they kind of show you which directions your colors are kind of moving in. So like if your shot is, say, warmer, it's probably going to be more towards like the yellow or red area of the vector scope. If it's colder, it's going to be towards the blue and cyan area of the vector scope. Vector scopes are handy, but they're not really too great for like balancing footage. You can kind of use them to compare and contrast shots to see where the certain colors and certain shots are lining up, so that you can make your shots consistent from shot to shot to shot, which is really, really helpful, especially if you were, say, shooting a scene with 3 different cameras, 3 different lenses, and they all need to look exactly the same. You can use the vector scope to kind of overlay those images and make sure that all of your colors are kind of lining up in the same places to make sure your shots are matching from shot to shot. However, that being said, if you color correct right, you don't really need to worry too much about making things match, because if you do the correction part right and your blacks are black and your whites are white, and you start applying grades and then taking those grades and copying them onto additional footage that's been corrected, your grade should look really consistent right off the bat. So that's kind of what vector scopes are used for, but we're just going to stick with the parades. So we've got our parades right here, which is super handy. So the way that I've kind of been learning to color grade here or color correct in the past few weeks is using curves. So let's go down in the lower right hand corner where the effects and presets are, and let's type in curves. And then take your curves 32-bit and drop that on your building above the clouds footage, and you should see it pop up in the effect control panel on the left hand side.
The only time I used curves was when I was following a tutorial for making fire.
Okay, curves is really, really powerful. You can do a lot of color balancing and color grading with curves. So let's just step through and kind of see what we're working with here. So one thing that's handy to know about curves is it's got 3 different scales that you can work on, and sometimes you're going to need to get in kind of nitty-gritty and close on curves to be able to see where in the color space you're kind of where the colors are being affected, right? So I like to kind of use the second step up, so that the curves is a little bit bigger and I can have fine control over all of my different channels. So I just clicked on this guy right here, and it made the curves box a little bit bigger. So then you're going to have to adjust your workspace a little bit so that you get full visibility of your entire curve. So what is curves? So curves is basically a plugin that allows you to tweak each channel of your colors. So we're working in RGB, so that'd be red, green, and blue. And you can see right up at the top we've got channel RGB. So right now, if we move curves around, it's going to control all the color channels simultaneously, right? So the upper right hand corner are the highlights or the white areas of the image, and the lower left hand corner are the blacks or the dark areas of the image. And if you slide those sliders around, you can see that you can very quickly make drastic changes to your image just by grabbing those 2 corners and dragging them around a little bit. You can make your darks very dark, your lights very light, you can add contrast, you can do all kinds of fun things in the RGB channel. So that controls all 3 channels. What makes curves such a powerful balancing tool is what makes it such a powerful balancing tool is it allows you to separate each channel. So you can work on just the red, just the green, and just the blue, and you can balance your entire shot out. Oh, shut up, phone. You can balance your entire image out using curves in the different channels. So and that's exactly what we're going to do to balance these shots out. And this curves is available in pretty much every kind of color correction software. DaVinci Resolve has this version of curves, and then several other versions of curves that is really, really helpful for selecting specific colors, desaturating or saturating specific colors, or changing the hue of specific colors, etc., etc., etc. So curves is one that gets used a lot. when color grading. So let's go ahead and start using curves to correct the color in this image. So if you're looking at the parades right now, what color do you think is the strongest in the whites? Red. Why?
Yeah.
Because it's up highest in the parade, right? So we can see in the parades we've got these peaks, right? We've got a blue peak here, a green peak here, and we've got a white peak here. So it looks like our reds are a little bit more prominent in the white areas of the image. And that's going to be a good place for us to start correcting this shot and making it nice and balanced. So let's go ahead and make sure you have the red channel selected in curves, and then we're going to go up to the upper right hand corner where we're working on the highlights, and we're just going to take that highlight and pull it down a little bit, and you'll notice that the image starts to balance out quite nicely, in fact. So there we go. And what I usually do when I'm working with the parades is I try to use these IRE levels, or the levels, to help me kind of figure out where I need to balance the image, right? So I try to get all of those peaks pretty much evened out. So, and then which section of the image do you think we're actually looking at when we're looking at these peaks?
Well, if we're looking to edit the clouds, then we're looking more towards the left.
Yes,
We
so
also
each,
need to pay attention
that's right,
to
Connor,
lights.
you're absolutely right. So each of these parades is the whole image, right, across, right? So this peak on the far left-hand side is the lower left-hand side of the image where all of that white is. So that's the white that we're balancing, is right down there in the lower left-hand corner of this footage. And you can see that as we cross the image, the highlights kind of drop off across the image over to the right-hand side, where they kind of become more of a neutral gray color. And you can see that there's quite a bit of imbalance in those grays as well, and we can work on kind of balancing those things out too. But those are naturally going to take on some interesting effects and color as we work. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to balance the darker areas of the image, right? So what channel do you think we should adjust to get our the dark areas of our image to kind of line up? Where do we want to go?
Blue, because on the right side it's the most, on the bottom of the blue it's the most up.
It's the highest in the
Yeah,
IRE
highest,
range,
yeah.
right? Yeah, absolutely right, Scott. So let's go ahead and select the blue channel. So go channel blue, and then we're going to go to the lower left-hand corner, and we're going to take the blue channel and we're going to scrub it in. And that's going to drop the blues down and kind of bring them in line a little bit more. And you can see right away, like this shot's changed pretty drastically. So if we click on the little effects button in the upper left-hand corner and flip that on and off, you can see that we've made a pretty big change in our image straight away, right? We've balanced this out quite a bit. And there's a little bit more tweaking that we can do to kind of fix it. You guys good? You have any questions? Anybody need anything? All right. All right, so then that being said, I'm still going to work these peaks a little bit on the highlights. So I'm going to stay in the blue channel, and I'm going to take the blue channel in the upper left-hand corner. I'm just going to drag it up a little bit to kind of get that peak to balance out in the lower left. And then I'm also going to do the same thing in the red channel on the lower end. So right now you can see the red channel is a little bit deeper in the darker areas of our image. I'm going to go ahead and go over to the red channel and go to the lower left-hand corner, and I'm just going to slide that up a little bit to try to balance out the dark areas of the image. And now we're getting towards an image that is pretty well balanced for the darks and the lights of the image. This image will start to take color grading really nicely. And let's just look at our before and after really quick. So if we just shut off curves and turn it back on, you can see we've pretty drastically changed the color in the image. Does anybody have any questions thus far?
Yours is a lot darker.
Mine is a lot darker. So we haven't done anything for contrast or anything like that yet.
No.
So we'll get there. But so this is kind of what you want. You want the dark areas of your image to kind of balance out nicely, and you want the light areas of the image to balance out nicely, and just kind of like do subtle changes. Subtle is good. And get them close. And this is obviously all pretty subjective as well. So close is good enough. And once you think you've kind of got a nice balance on the image, you can kind of stop tweaking this first part of your color correction. Is everybody with me? Everybody got something similar to what I have up here in terms of like the peaks of the image being pretty much balanced out and the darker areas of the image being balanced out?
Don't do that.
You know what? I
Do
have a
not
question.
click auto. Shoot.
The question was basically asked, there's a stopwatch next to curves, and the question was if you wanted to animate this over time, could you do that to kind of create a look that you could animate into? And the answer is yes. And I countered with kind of the way that you want to approach color correction is you want to compartmentalize your color correction and your color grading, right? So we'll do the corrections first, and then what we'll do is we'll use an adjustment layer or even another copy of the image that's been balanced to create a grade on, and then we can take those different color correction tools that we use, curves, hue, saturation, whatever it happens to be, and we can copy those graded items to additional shots to create a balanced look across many shots. All right, so the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to attack the contrast. So this shot is relatively flat. And when I say flat, it means that we've got room here on the top of the image for additional brightness, and we've got room on the bottom of the image for additional darkness. So we can create more contrast here. Let's go ahead and add levels to our stack on this image, and we'll use that to bring some contrast into our shot and balance it out a little bit. So let's go down to Effects and Presets and type in Levels. And we're just looking for color correction levels 32-bit. And we're going to go ahead and drop that on our footage, and you'll see levels open up. So I closed my curves box. You could also shrink it down a little bit so you can see your levels come in. And then you can just close that up so that we can work a little bit more effectively on the levels themselves. So when we're looking at the levels, this is kind of similar to what we're seeing in the parades, right? Like we can see the areas of the image where R, G, and B, and cyan and yellow and green all kind of play in the shot. And we can work on individual channels, much like we can in curves. So if we wanted to, we could adjust contrasts in individual red, green, and blue if we wanted to. I'm going to use this just to adjust contrast across the entire image because we've already pretty much balanced out our shot. Now we're just going to use levels to add contrast. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to take the caret on the far right, which is our highlights, and we're going to slide it to the left until it just starts to peak out at 100 IRE up here. So you don't want to, the whole point of color correction is to retain as much dynamic range in the image as possible. So if you start to see these parades crush out on the top like that, you know that you're losing information inside of your image, right? You're basically crushing everything at the top of your the IRE range to white. So you lose all this detail in the clouds, right? It's not to say that you can't do that. There are many color grades where they utilize things like you hear crushing the blacks, where you like crush all the information out of the blacks to make them really, really deep and saturated where you can't see a lot of detail. And I've also seen the same thing done with the whites, where they make the whites like nuclear so that you can't see any detail in them and they're super hot. Yeah. But what we want to do is we want to retain as much images data in the image as possible. So I'm going to slide that caret back, and I'm going to make sure that nothing really peaks over 100 IRE. And we know that in the lower left-hand corner where those reds are is kind of the brightest area of the image. So we just want to make sure that that is not going over 100 IRE. And then we're going to do the same thing with the darker areas of the image. We're going to go to the far left, and we're going to grab the caret on the left, which is the dark areas of the image, and we're going to slide that in till those dark areas of the image just start to touch 0. And now you can see we have a nice contrasty, balanced image. We could also adjust the gray levels here, the gamma levels. So in the middle, you've got this other caret, and you can move that up or down to kind of adjust the middle ground, or the middle colors, middle tones of the image, up or down in the IRE scale to balance or help your image out if it needs a little bit more balancing in those areas. All right, and like I said, you don't want to overdo this. Subtlety is good. And now that we've got things kind of contrasty, and I'm just adjusting my contrast or my black on the levels until the reds start to touch 0 IRE, and I think I'm going to go back into my curves just for a second here and do just a little bit more balancing to get everything to kind of look good across the board. So I'm going to grab that red channel and just punch that up a little bit. And I think I'm also going to grab the green channel on the lower end, and I'm just going to punch that up ever so slightly. And that'll balance everything out in the darks and the lights of my image. So then if you turn these things on and off, you can see what a difference we've made in the image. So our curves kind of balance the image out, and our levels give it a nice contrasty look. And this is a nice starting point for which we could start to color grade. I'm going to adjust the contrast just ever so slightly, and yeah, that's looking really good. All right, so the next thing that I would do is probably push a little bit of saturation into this, so bring a little bit more color to it. And this is starting to borderline on we're color grading here, not color correcting. So now we're actually using our subjective tastes to bring more flavor to the image. If we wanted this to feel, colder and more hard or steely, we might, add blue to it or pull saturation out, whatever you're deciding. So let's say that we want to now start grading this image. So let's actually create an adjustment layer. So let's go Layer, New, DeAndre, stay with me, man. Adjustment layer. Are you working along with us?
Yeah.
All right. So we're going to create this adjustment layer, and we're going to call this Color Grade 1. If you want to, you can create multiple grades. So you should be able to, at this point, take this image that's been relatively balanced, and you can start doing some fun stuff with it to create an interesting look.
Okay, good.
All right, so we created an adjustment layer, and now what we're going to do is we're going to use some of the same tools, but in a different way. We're going to use them to create a mood or a grade for this image. So let's start with hue saturation. So go ahead over to the effects and presets and type in hue, and you'll see hue/saturation pop up underneath color correction. And let's grab that bad boy and drop it on color grade 1. Okay, so now we're going to start to color grade this a little bit. So let's just try some stuff. So let's say I wanted this to look like post-apocalyptic, cold, dirty, dry, nasty looking, something like that. So let's call this, well, right now we got it selected as color grade 1. Let's call it color grade 1 and call it post-apoc for post-apocalyptic, so that we can create a look that we can apply to different footage. So color grade 1, post-apoc. So when I think post-apocalyptic, instantly I think it is kind of a more desaturated, dirty image. It's probably got some sort of color cast to it. So let's go ahead and take some saturation out of this right away. Let's just pull some of the color out of it, make it a little more gray. There we go. It's looking nice and dingy now. So we went from this kind of nice blue sky to a much more neutral looking desaturated image. All right, cool. You can also do some fun stuff here by controlling the master hue. So if you go to the hue wheel and you just slightly adjust this, you can start to create a much different look. Like now my sky is purple instead of blue. If I take it and I slide the hue wheel the other direction, it becomes a more like turquoise or green looking image. So you can do quite a bit with hue saturation just by playing around with the color wheel and the saturation and lightness. I'm going to go ahead and set that back to 0. I'm going to use curves to do a little bit of work on this as well. So let's go ahead and add curves to this stack on the left hand side. So I'm going to go to effects and presets, and I'm going to go to curves, and I'm going to take curves and I'm going to dump that on underneath my hue saturation. And then I'm going to close hue saturation up so I can work on the curve a little bit more effectively. And I'm setting my curve to the second size so that I can kind of adjust it and make it do what I want it to do. All right, so I think we should darken this image up a little bit, make it look a little more dreary. So I'm just in the RGB channel right now. I'm going to take the RGB channel and I'm just going to pull the image lightness down a bit. So that, I mean, this is kind of back to where it was before, so that it looks a little more dingy and not quite as bright and colorful. So I did that with the RGB channel. And then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the green channel, and in the center, where the center of the curve is, so right here, I'm going to go ahead and click, and I'm going to push a little more green into my image. So this will kind of give it a more like matrixy look almost. So I'm going to click in the center, and I'm just going to push the greens up. And you'll notice right away that very drastically changes the mood of our image. Now we have more of like a toxic green looking image, and if that's not what you want, you can change this however you like. So if you want to maybe make it look like hotter or warmer, we could say go into the red channel and push red into the image instead. So we bring red in. If we bring red and green in, it should give us more of a yellowish tint. And if we pull some blues out, it's
reading
gonna
my mind.
it's gonna make
Stop that.
it's gonna make this image a lot warmer and more
not-
dirty looking.
I don't see it like that. It's not doing that.
Stop it. Stop it.
Get some
Right, so then we can kind of see what we've done in terms of color grading on this image if we just turn off our color grade adjustment layer. So here's what we started with our color correction, and here's what we ended up with on our grade. Two drastically different looking images.
I'm not seeing it like that on mine. I don't know with the curves.
Well, DeAndre, this part is very subjective, so you can do what you feel you want to do with this. I'm showing you how to use the tool. You use the tool to achieve the look that you're trying to go for. All right, so it's looking pretty decent right now. Let's just do some more work in terms of just stylizing this a little bit, and let's add some grain to the shot. So let's go over into effects and presets and type in grain, and then we're going to add the add grain plugin. So I'm taking add grain and I'm putting in below curves and hue and saturation, so it's going to be the last thing applied. So the add grain can be a little bit, well, number one, it is processor intensive, so if you're going to add grain to anything that you're working on, I suggest that you do it dead last, because it takes a lot of processing power to do the grain for whatever reason, and it also increases your file sizes. And the reason that it does that is because you have all these areas of highlights and lowlights now on tiny little spots or even pixels, right? And that is going to give the image a lot more color information, because now a lot of pixels are changing in their darkness and lightness depending on the grain filter that you apply to it. All right, so when we're looking at the grain filter, you can see I've got this white box in the middle of my image, and that is supposed to be previewing my grain. I generally, especially if I'm working on 1080p footage, I just shut that off and set it to final output so that I can see grain across my whole image. And right now, so if I flip this add grain on and off, you can see what it's doing to my image, right? So it's dirtying this image up quite a bit. And I'm going to play with this a little bit more. So I'm going to go into the presets, and I'm going to look at a couple of these presets. What's your question?
What did you do exactly for the grain again?
I just kind of cool. You've got a bunch of different presets in here for different film stocks, basically. So if you want to, you can play with some of these different film stocks and see if they give you a look that you like. Most of this grain is color, so that means that it's creating grain in multiple colors. If you want to, you can make your grain monochromatic. I like monochromatic grain. So if I'm adding grain to something, I'm usually using monochromatic because I think it just looks better. And you can see exactly what it's doing to the image. If you zoom in, say to 100%, you can see what the grain looks like, and you can toggle that grain on and off to see how it's changing your image up. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. You can play with size, intensity, all that good stuff. I'm going to set the intensity to 0.5, so it's going to be about half the intensity that it was before. And this is looking pretty good. I got a nice dreary, dingy kind of look to this. If I wanted to push this even further, I could start doing some things with like layer solids and masks. So let's play around with that a little bit. So this is another one of those things that I think you should probably compartmentalize from your color grade post-apocalyptic look. let's add these over the top of both of those layers. So let's go ahead and add a new layer, add a new solid, and I'm going to give this, I'm going to kind of grab the blue or this like turquoise that's in the upper part of the image right now, and I'm going to kind of like bring some saturation into it to give this kind of a sickly look. And I'm gonna, okay, all right, yeah, colors, okay. All right, so I've got my color kind of selected, and I'm gonna call this sky overlay. And I'm gonna click OK. So obviously we don't want the whole image to be green like this. So the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start playing with some blending modes. And I'm gonna go into the multiply blending mode, which is gonna take my image and it's gonna really apply a very drastic color effect to it.
How did you get that?
I use the blending modes, so blending mode, multiply. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to utilize masks to kind of select the area of the image that I want to affect with this overlay. So I'm going to go to my pen tool, and I'm just going to create a mask kind of across the top of my image, like so. And then I'm going to hit F for feather, and I'm going to feather this out by like 300 pixels. And it's going to create a nice feathered kind of color overlay at the top of this thing. I set it to 400 just to blend it in a little bit better.
Wait, where did you select? Oh, yeah.
And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull some of the opacity out of this. I'm going to pull it down to like 50% so that it's a little more subtle.
Wait, did you use a mask or something?
Yeah, I used a
How did you
mask.
feather?
Oh, okay.
Alright, so one of the things to keep in mind when you're color grading is subtlety is key, right? You can make very, very drastic changes to the imagery, but you want to make sure you're retaining detail, and you want to just do subtle changes at first. You don't want to go all the way to 100 miles an hour right away. So just subtle changes. As you move forward, the look will become more and more dramatic, even though you're making subtle changes. Like if we look at the difference between what I have right now on my screen.
There we go.
So here's the image, and if I just shut off and go back to the just corrected footage, you can see we've made a very drastic color grade to this footage in just those two layers with the subtle changes that we made.
That looks dope.
Right? It's looking pretty post-apocalyptic right now.
Yeah, that looks like Fallout 3 right now.
Right? Now if we added some like nuclear mushroom clouds in the background, it'd look even more post-apocalyptic. So that being said, let's do one more color overlay on this thing.
This is more radioactive, actually.
Yeah, that's fine. And all this stuff is subjective. I mean, that's the thing to keep in mind. Like, what you do with your imagery is that's the art. That's the artistry in this. This is honestly one of my very favorite parts of media, is being able to color grade my footage, because it allows you to give a mood and a feel to the footage that was never there in the first place. And it will drastically affect how the audience feels when they're looking at your footage. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add one more overlay to this thing. I'm just going to take my sky overlay and I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to rotate it 180 degrees so that it's on the bottom of my image now. And I'm going to call this ground overlay, even though it's not ground. And I'm going to change the color of this layer solid to something different, something more orangey, I think.
How do you change it?
So you just go to solid settings and go into the color, and then you can change the color.
Solid settings.
What was that?
Where are the solid
Layer solid settings.
Press arm. That's full.
There we go. That's the stuff. Alright, so now I've got kind of a nice dingy brown on the bottom of my image, and I've got that kind of ugly green on the top of my image, and I've got grain applied to it. My image is starting to look pretty warped. So I'm going to pull a little bit of opacity out of the bottom just to make these nice and subtle. And now I got a nice kind of post-apocalyptic look going on with this thing. So here's the before and after. So here's just our corrected shot. And then here's our post-apocalyptic grade.
How did you change
Go ahead,
the
Adam.
color?
How did you change the color of it?
Yeah, that's what I was...
Okay, so
Nah.
one more time. Now what we need to do with our footage is we need to show the progression of the color correction and the grade over time. So what I did is I duplicated my footage and I made an original footage layer. And all I did to do that is I just deleted off the color grading effects that we applied to the footage when we corrected it at the beginning. So this original footage layer is just the regular footage with no color correction or grade on it whatsoever. So we want to step through each individual process, right? So I want to see the color corrected footage, and then I want to see the grade applied over the top of that. Then I want to see the sky overlay, and then I want to see the ground overlay for my completed look. All right, so now we need to animate these over time. So let's just start by kind of like cutting them where we want them to cut in. So we've got original footage, we got 5 steps to this thing. So let's just do one step every 2 seconds. So let's go to, well actually let's make it a little quicker. Let's just have it go second by second so that we can see the footage for a couple seconds at the end with the full grade on it. So I'm going to go out to the first second and I'm going to take all 4 of the above layers and I'm going to hit Alt, left bracket, and it's going to cut all those layers right there.
I'm sorry, what button?
Alt, left bracket. That's a really handy quick key
Bracket.
to remember.
What is
Alt or
what is that key?
Well, it's Alt Option on Macs. That key in the middle between Command and Control.
So Alt and what?
Alt, left bracket.
Where is left bracket on the keyboard again?
Left bracket on the keyboard. These are the bracket keys.
Oh, right.
Brackets to the right.
Bracket is underneath, the brackets are underneath the minus and plus keys. Okay, so Alt left bracket will cut your layers off. This is a really handy way to be able to edit things in where you want them to be inside of your layer stacks. So then let's go ahead and move forward another second, over to 2 seconds, and let's take and do the same thing for the top 3 layers. So I select the top 3 layers, and I'm going to do Alt left bracket again, and it's basically cutting one at a time.
It's not working for mine.
It works, I swear! Wipe effect. I'm just going to back up here a little bit. I put a wipe effect over my color corrected footage. And I'm actually going to name that color, or I'm going to just call this CC underscore footage for color corrected footage. Alright, so one of the things that I would like you guys to do on this assignment is create some nice effects that reveal each step of your color correction and color grade. Scott.
No wipe appeared on my screen.
Okay, hold on a second. Let me work through this. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I want the wipe to wipe on my color corrected footage. So I'm going to go over to the effects and presets, type in wipe, and then down here under transitions wipes, you'll see a whole bunch of wipe options. I'm going to choose the linear wipe, and I'm going to take that linear wipe and I'm going to put it on my color corrected footage. If I push U, it will show me where the keyframes are, and they just so happen to go where your current time indicator is. So if I want that to go where I want it to go, I'll move my current time indicator to the beginning of my footage, and then let's drag and drop that wipe one more time, and you will see that come onto your footage. If you push U, you can see the keyframes. I'm going to make it so that this wipe happens a little quicker over the course of half a second. And your footage wipe should look something like this.
Note that does not happen in mine.
Neither.
Well, then I could say that you probably need some help, so let me help you. So we've been having some funky problems with the wipes not wanting to work on adjustment layers. So when we got to this layer right here, this one, the color grade post-apocalyptic, I had to create a custom wipe. So I just used a mask to do that. So I selected my footage, double-clicked on the rectangle tool, which gave me a mask that goes all the way around my footage. Then what I did is I went into the mask itself, keyframed mask path at where I wanted to start, which is right there. I'm going to make sure that you can actually see the mask. There's the mask. And then all I did was create a second keyframe where I dragged the mask on the top 2 nodes down to the bottom so that it's no longer revealing any of the footage. and it creates a nice little custom white for you. So our footage looks like this now. Yes, DeAndre?
How do we make multiple custom paths? Like, can we just keep on adjusting it more?
Adam had a question about how to create a custom white for a layer that's already got a mask on it. All right, so that's the same process, right? So what I'm going to do is I got my sky overlay, and this time I'm going to create this just a little bit differently. I'm just going to grab the rectangle mask, and I'm going to create a mask over the top of my footage. And you'll see that it totally interferes with the mask that's already up there. So what we want to do is we want to change the type, right? So we want this to be subtract instead of add. So the mask type is different, and then all the other stuff is pretty much the same. You're going to animate your path over time, right? So I have keyframes set at the beginning of the footage, and then I'm just going to select the nodes on this mask and create a wipe across the footage, just like we did before. And then you're actually seeing the masked overlay wipe on, right? So you can have multiple masks interacting with each other at the same time. You can do fun things like easy ease in and easy ease out to make this stuff look nice. So then what that's going to look like is this. It's got a linear wipe, top wipe, and then another wipe that brings the top on, and we can create yet again another wipe that brings on the final overlay at the bottom of the footage. Cool. Okay. So let's do this. Everybody save your stuff, and let's start playing around with another shot. Cool, that one's looking really nice. Okay, so once you finish this up, what you can do is you can add this shot to your main composition. So let's go into our project window. So we got our project window up, and we've got building above the clouds, which is our first shot. So I'm actually going to rename this shot 1 _ building above the clouds, and I'm going to drag that composition into my comps folder so that I'm keeping my composition separate from my footage. And then what we can do is we can go to our main composition and dump shot 1 building above the clouds on there, and we've got our first 10 seconds laid in and ready to go. Cool. Let's do another shot, shall we? I'm going to hit save real quick, so Command S to save. And we're going to go ahead and take a peek at our next shot. Let's do the motorcycle on the highway shot. So I'm going to grab motorcycle on the highway, double click it, and we're going to set ins and outs. And it looks like this one is less than 10 seconds long. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the whole shot, and we'll grade the whole shot, and then we'll stretch it to 10 seconds using time remapping. So let's go ahead, grab motorcycle on the highway, and drag that down onto our little composition tab in the project window to create a new comp for it. Then let's go ahead and go up to our composition settings and set the time on this. Oh, you know what? It's 2 frames short of 10 seconds. I'm not going to split hairs on that. We're going to leave it be. So it's only a few frames short of 10. I'm not going to worry about it. Let's go ahead and start color correcting this. So first, let's take the original footage and let's hit return and call it orig or orige for the original footage, and then let's duplicate it and call this one CC for color correction. And we'll start correcting this footage. And it's pretty much the same process that we did before. So I'm going to set my workspace back to the color settings, and that's going to give me my parade over on the left-hand side. And we can start working the color grade on this bad boy. All right, so this shot, you can tell that the dark areas of this shot are much, much different looking than our previous shot. They're really out of balance. Like, all the blacks are really red, and you can see by looking at the parade. So right now the parade on the left, the reds are much higher up in the IRE range, and we can very easily see what we need to do to balance this shot out. When it comes to the highlights, we don't have a lot to work with on the highlight side. Like, the sky has probably got a lot of blue cast to it. We can kind of scrub through this and find a spot where we can kind of see Like this is probably where I would balance the white of the image, and I would probably look, and it looks, it's really blown out. So what I would do is just try to balance out the whites best as possible, but you might just need to use your eye subjectively to find the white point that works best for you, or if possible, we could balance from like the white stripe on the road. But let's utilize a different color correction tool this time, so you guys can kind of get an idea of all the different tools that you have at your disposal to work with within After Effects. So let's go over to Effects and Presets and type in Lumetri.
What?
Lumetri. Lumetri, and you will see Lumetri Color come up. So this is kind of like SA Color Finesse. It's a full color correction tool, kind of self-contained within After Effects. So let's grab Lumetri Color and go ahead and drop it on the CC layer, the color correction layer, and you will see Lumetri come up in the effect controls on the left-hand side. Is everybody with me?
Yes. And you're recording.
Cool beans. All right, so let's go into Lumetri and look at a few things real quick. So basic correction, and that's pretty much what we're going to be working on right now. So Lumetri is a lot different than working with just curves, levels, and hue saturation. It's kind of got all of those tools built into one system, which is really nice. So if you open up basic correction, there's a lot of stuff in there. There's input LUT, which is a lookup table. So if you're more familiar with color correction, there are these things called LUTs that you can save out that will create specific looks for your footage or specific looks for specific cameras. So if we were, say, working with an ARRI Alexa and we wanted to apply the Alexa default log C2 Rec 709 LUT, we could click on that LUT and it's going to apply that LUT directly to the footage. It looks like total garbage because this is not shot on an ARRI Alexa, and it's probably not a full log color space, so we've got whites that are way blown out, the dark areas of the image are weird, and it's got a lot more magenta in it, and it just looks terrible. So we're not going to use LUTs on this stuff. So you really only want to use LUTs if you know exactly what you shot on and you have a LUT specific to that camera that can help you out. But what we can do is we can use Lumetri to white balance this shot for us. So you'll notice right there at basic color correction, we've got the white balance selector. So the idea of that is you can use that little eyedropper to select whatever is in your image that is white. And I'm going to go off of the strip on the road. I think that's probably the best source of white we have in this shot. And I'm going to click that to get my white point. And even that doesn't really look very right. Like the sky is red. So this might not work as well as I was hoping it would work. We might need to resort to using curves to make this work a little bit better. But let's go with it and see what happens. We'll maybe bring the dark areas into balance, and then we can play with it a little bit more and try to balance the shot out as a whole and get it to look a little nicer. Go ahead, Peter.
If you white balance on the sky, it looks better.
If you white balance on the sky, it works better. Okay, let's give that a shot. So if you do need to re-white balance, you either want to reset your Lumetri color at the top, or you can hit Command Z and go backwards. If you try to white balance over something you've already white balanced on, it's going to throw everything off and it's going to look funky. So Peter suggested we use the sky, so let's go over to the sky and white balance there. All right, that does indeed look better. And you can see on our parades that the white areas of this image, on the red, green, and blue, are much more lined up. So if you look at those two changes right now, you can see that after we did the white balance on the sky, it does indeed look much more balanced. But it does look like we could push a little green into it to kind of balance it up even a little bit better. All right, so with Lumetri, you've got a whole bunch of tools kind of combined into one tool. So you've got a creative tab where you can kind of create looks. And again, there's a whole bunch of like built-in looks here. So once you get your footage kind of balanced, you could just come in here and like select specific looks for this stuff, and it will apply those looks to your footage, and you can get some really interesting looks that way. You've got a creative tab, you've got the curves tab, which is almost the same as what we were using before. You can see you've got red, green, and blue all to select from. And so let's say we wanted to push the green up a little bit on this. We could go into the green curve and push that around a little bit to try to help balance it out. But it looks like, let's see if we can Yeah, that's a little bit better. Very, 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 very subtle, subtle correction there. And I'm going to try that with the blue just a little bit to balance everything out on those highlights a little bit more. And then let's go ahead and balance out our dark areas of the image right now too. So obviously the red is really, really high in the dark areas of the image. So let's go into the red RGB curve and let's go ahead and drag the reds down and balance all those darks out. And now our shot is starting to look much more balanced.
Where the heck where is this at?
Under curves.
Curve.
So I went through creative real quick, and there's obviously a lot of parameters inside Lumetri. So I went into curves, and I just adjusted the highlights and the lowlights with the curves like we did before. And to me, it looks like there might be a little too much green down there in the dark areas, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the green up just ever so slightly. And then I'm going to pull the blue down.
Are we trying to make them all equal?
Yep, that is exactly what we were trying to do. And I'm kind of looking at these little pops of black right here where the tank would be, and trying to balance those out. And that looks pretty close. So right now, if we just turn Lumetri on and off, you can see we've made a huge difference in terms of balance on our shot. You can see the parades line up nicely, red, green, and blue on both the highlights and dark areas of the image. So this is a pretty nicely balanced shot. So like I said before, if you wanted to, now you could go in and you could start applying looks to this. So if we go into creative and we just say, let's try SL Gold Tobacco. Boom. We've got SL Gold Tobacco built in there, and it's giving us a kind of warmer look to the footage. Let's try SR Noir Nouvelle. That gives you this kind of green, monotone, monochromatic look.
Where's look at?
Creative, under the creative tab now, DeAndre.
Creative, okay.
Don't do that.
So let's look at a couple of the other areas inside Lumetri. So, like I said, that once you start getting into color tools that are a little bit more robust, like Lumetri is, you're going to start to get into some interesting. You're going to get into some interesting areas. So in the curves area, you've also got this hue saturation curve, right? So this is kind of a cool tool. This will allow you, and this isn't the best shot for this because there's not a lot of like really bold colors in here yet. We'll play around with the hue saturation controls on another shot that's got a little bit more color interest in it, so that we can see how this tool works a little bit better. But what this allows you to do is, like, let's say we wanted to desaturate the reds in this image, right? That's really the most bold color that I see. We've got this little splotch of red right there on the RPM gauge, and we've got this little splotch of red over here on the starter, and we've got this splotch of red on the stop sign. So let's say I wanted to take all of my reds and I wanted to desaturate my red areas, right? So on this hue curve, what I can do is I can set some points, and I can grab and I can desaturate specific areas of the color wheel, right? So if you look at those reds now, they're starting to desaturate. So if I'm going to stretch this out just a little bit and try to pull a little bit more of those reds out, now you can see that I've almost completely desaturated the red on the RPM gauge, right? So that allows you to very specifically target selected colors for manipulation. So if you wanted to pull a certain color out or push a certain color, wanted to oversaturate something and then desaturate something else, that hue wheel allows you to do all of that stuff.
I don't see a change on yours, unlike mine.
Look at my screen real quick. So watch the reds right there. So I'm moving this forward in steps, so you can see that the reds have desaturated quite a bit from where they were before. And I'm just Control-Zing back to get that hue saturation curve back to its original settings. And with Lumetri, you can kind of activate and deactivate certain sections of the plugin whenever you want. So like if you wanted to see the effect that your curves was having, you could just click that active checkbox, and it would show you only what the curves section is doing. Color wheels. Color wheels is another option that you can use for pushing certain colors in and out, making an image warmer or more of any specific color. Like if you wanted your midtones to be more magenta, you could come into the color wheels and push midtones to magenta. If you wanted to push them, say, to cyan or blue to give this a colder look, you can do that with the color wheels as well. So you can use the color wheels for multiple things. You can be creative with them to create a specific look. You can use them to help balance the image out if you're trying to balance your darks and your lights and your midtones. There's all kinds of things that you can do with the color wheels. HSL secondaries. So secondaries is really cool. Secondaries allows you to go in and refine specific colors again, separate from like the hue saturation wheel. So you can actually, like with Oh Brother Where Art Thou, they took all the greens and turned them very orange, right? So if you wanted to do that with your image, what you'd do is you come into the HSL secondaries and you'd select your color, and you can create specific selections for specific colors inside of your image, which is really fun. This specific shot isn't perfect for that because there's not, like I said, there's not a lot of really bold colors here. So we'll play around with some of these additional parts of Lumetri here in a few minutes when we get on to another shot. So, but let's take this image and push it a little bit further and get this fully balanced and set the contrast on. So right now you can see that our image is kind of like really high up in the IRE scale. Like the whites are really blown out and the black areas of the image are very high, right? So we want to bring those black area of the image down, and we want to bring a lot of nice contrast and richness into this. So let's do that in the basic correction tab. So I'm back up at the top of Lumetri. And we're just going to go into the blacks, and we're going to pull the blacks down. So once you do that, you're going to start seeing the parades change quite a bit. And it looks like the blues are really dropping off there, so we might go back into our curves and balance a little bit more. So if I want to do that, I can take my blues and balance those out a little bit more. Take the green, do the same thing. There we go. And we can come back in and keep working this footage. So this is one of those instances where, I mean, the footage here is really compressed, so it's not the greatest stuff to work with from the beginning, but we've made a pretty drastic difference in the footage inside Lumetri. We've balanced out those highlights. We've balanced out the black or dark areas of the image. I'm crushing the blackout here a little bit on the bottom. It still looks like we've got quite a bit of red pushed into our curves. So I'm going to go into the red, and I'm going to just pull a little bit more of that out in the curves to kind of balance the blacks out a little bit more. And it looks like I'm going to do the same thing with the greens and just balance the highlights out a little bit. And now we've got a nice balanced shot that we can start applying looks to. Cool. So we've got our Lumetri color, and now you can see quite a bit of difference between our original shot and what we ended up with for a color corrected version of this image. It's looking pretty good. Cool. So I think what I want to do from here on in is let's just go through each of these shots, and I'll show you the different tools that you can use for color correction, and we'll just do correction on these images, and then I'll let you guys loose for a little while, and you can play around with creating looks for each of your color corrected images. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was going to ask if we take a break, but you just said,
Oh yeah, we can do that. We can totally do that. All right, so now what we're going to do is we are going to go through the rest of our footage, and we are going to correct our footage first, and then we'll go back and I'll give you guys some time to kind of play around with additional grades, and I'll go through a few more techniques and things like that that you can use to make your footage pop. All right, so let's go back to our project window and look at some of our next shots. So right now we got motorcycle on the highway. I'm going to go ahead and title that one shot 2 _ motorcycle on the highway. I'm going to drag that in my comps folder, and I'm also going to lay that down on my timeline. So now I've got my first shot and my second shot cut in to my composition. So let's see, we've got building above the clouds, we've got couple walking on beach, shoes on the street. This one should be pretty quick to color correct. So let's grab shoes on the street. This one's 27 seconds long, so we're going to go in and we're going to set our ins and our outs to make this 10 seconds long. So I just double click that footage, and I'm just going to kind of come back to the beginning of the shot. And I like this spot where we can see that yellow line on the left there. So I'm just going to pick this up at like 6 seconds and run it out to 16 seconds. And set my in and my out there, and I've got 10 seconds of footage selected. And then I'm just going to take that shoes in the street footage, drag it onto my composition tab in the project window to create a new composition from that, and we can start working our color correction. So this shot is honestly really the most balanced that we've seen so far. So right away, if you're looking at your parades, you can see that the white areas in the image are pretty close to balanced, and the black areas in the image are pretty close to balanced as well, which is really nice. We are balancing black kind of on her shoes, so her shoes may or may not be full black, but we're going to assume that they are. And we'll use the curves and things to balance this out. So on this shot, I'm going to show you another one of the many color tools that After Effects has that you can use to grade footage with. So let's go ahead and in Effects and Presets type in SA space color, and we're going to use SA Color Finesse 3. Make sure you go ahead and save as well. So let's grab SA Color Finesse 3. Let's drag that onto shoes in the streets, and you're going to see SA Color Finesse 3 pop into your effect control panel. Go ahead, Connor.
Are we not going to duplicate this?
We can do that later. We're just going to work the correction right now. We can duplicate it out when we need to. All right. So yes, Peter.
I've got a grid across mine that says I've got a trial mode.
Yep, okay, so you went a little faster than I was hoping. So what we're going to do is we're going to hit full interface, and it's going to ask you if you want to register. Oh, okay, it didn't ask me if I want to register. It put a grid over yours right away?
Yeah.
Yeah, mine says register.
Yeah, mine says
Yeah,
register.
yeah, ours same thing.
Mine said
Oh,
register,
well,
hit
just-
cancel, and it changed it
And it
to
came up to trial?
Yep.
I wish they'd really fix that stuff because it's super annoying.
Oh, and then just full it. Whoa.
All right, so this is SA Color Finesse. It's a standalone tool that you can use inside of After Effects. The registration is a little bit of a pain, so if you are prompted to register, just say, type in like Hennepin Tech, okay, and it should pop up, and you shouldn't have any like grids or overlays or any funky stuff happening. If it's happening on your machines out there, I believe you can quit and reopen After Effects, and that registration stuff should be taken care of. But don't quote me on that; it's a little bit of a pain.
I ended up just hitting full interface, and it popped up to what you have going.
Right, but when you go back, you're probably going to see a grid over your footage,
Okay.
which is a pain. Again, like all of the stuff that you're seeing inside of SA Color Finesse can be done with the plugins inside of After Effects. You don't have to use it. I just wanted to show you that this exists, and it's something you can use or explore if you want to. I've used Color Finesse to grade an entire film, so it works pretty good. All kinds of things over on the left-hand side. So you've got all of your reference monitors over on the left-hand side. Your RGB parades are right there. You've got your overlay waveform, your vector scope, your histograms, your tone curves, all this good stuff, so that you can see all your different tools over there on the left-hand side. We're going to stick with the RGB waveform. Over on the right, you have your preview window. Right now we're looking at the result, so if we make any changes, say we change the hue, you're going to see that happen over on the left-hand side. You can also toggle between your result and your source. You can create splits, so if you say change one image very drastically, you can see the original image and the image that you are correcting right next to each other, so you can kind of see the before and after. and you can also create references and things like that of additional footage that you want to correct too. So this is a pretty cool tool. It does a lot of funky, fun stuff inside of After Effects. I'm going to go ahead and click Reset All just so that everything goes back to its normal controls. So we'll go through this just really quickly. And then over on the lower left-hand side, you've got all the different controls for hue, saturation, lightness, RGB, cyan, magenta, yellow. Your curves are down there, your levels are down there. You can create secondaries, which is something we touched on very slightly in the Lumetri tree, where you can select specific colors and fine-tune specific colors if you want to. And there's other options like limiting, which we won't get into because that's super color science-y and we don't need to go that far. So like I said, this pretty much contains all the very similar tools that you can use inside of After Effects proper. Personally, I really like it because you got a lot of good reference monitors to look at, and you can create some really good secondaries with it as well. And you can apply multiple levels of correction to one shot with one plugin instead of having to use many to do the same thing. All right, so I showed you this tool. I don't want to dig too much into this because I know some of you guys have like grids and stuff on your screens. So we will skip Color Finesse for now. If you guys want to play around with it, you know where it is. But we will just go back to kind of utilizing the standard plugins within After Effects to work our corrections. So let's go ahead and we're going to start with curves, just like we did on the last one. So we're going to go into curves. Let's grab curves and put that on our footage. And let's, I'm going to step the size up on mine a little bit so that I can see my parades and my curves a little bit better. And we're going to start working this footage. So this shot, like I said, is pretty well balanced. It probably needs a little contrast and just a little bit of balancing. So let's go ahead and get started with balancing. So I'm just going to start right away on the blue channel. And we're just going to bring the blue channel in the dark areas. We're going to bring that down a little bit just to kind of line up the blacks that we're seeing on the shoes. And then in the red channel, I'm going to bring the dark areas up just a little bit to balance everything out and get a nice corrected blacks down there in the bottom. And then let's go ahead and do the same thing to the highlights. So the highlights are going to be really easy to do in this shot because we have these big giant bands of white which we can work off of inside of our shot. So I'm just going to use the highlights that we're seeing on the top of the screen, and I'm going to go ahead and just balance out the parades using the different channels. It looks to me like the green channel is just a little bit low, so I'm going to go ahead and go into the green channel, and I'm going to pop that up just ever so slightly. And then I'm going to go to the blue channel and I'm going to pull that one down just ever so slightly. These are very, very subtle changes, not too much craziness happening here. And to me, in the middle, so here in the middle tones, we have some interesting things happening. So you can see that our middle tones are a little, I mean, they're really close to balance, but they're just a hair off. So I'm going to go to the red channel. And I'm going to click in the middle of the curve, and I'm just going to pull the red channel down ever so slightly in the middle to pull those mid-tones back in a little bit. And then I'm going to adjust the highlights ever so slightly as well, and it looks like we're getting pretty close to a nicely balanced shot. So if I turn my curves on and off, you can see the parades line up really nicely. Now the light areas are nice and bright white and balanced, and the same with the dark areas are nice and dark and balanced. And this is a shot now that we can work on contrast with. So let's go ahead and add levels in for creating our contrast. So we'll go ahead and add levels to balance this bad boy out. And I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to bring the highlights up a little bit. So this is one of these shots where we probably don't want to peg the highlights because I don't think the white stripes on the street necessarily need to be nuclear white. I think they can be subdued a little bit. That way if, like, say this shot tilted up or something like that, and then there were brighter areas of the image like the sky or the sun or anything like that, those are the areas that you'd want to reserve for the very bright parts of the IRE scale at the top. So I'm going to leave these down around like 80% white, and then I'm going to do the same on the lower end. I'm just going to pull some contrast into this and bring my slider over until it just starts to nudge along the 0 IRE level. And now we've got a nicely contrasted shot. It's a lot less muddy and foggy, and we're definitely on the right track to make this nice and balanced. I'm also going to go back into my curves for just a second in the red channel, and I'm going to push the red channel up a little bit on the highlight side just to keep everything nice and balanced. Good, so we got a nice balanced corrected shot. So now Connor was saying we should probably duplicate our footage so we get our original shot in there. Let's do that real quick. So we're just going to duplicate our footage. I'm going to take the one on the bottom and delete out the levels and the curves so that we have an original to work with. So, or ridge on the bottom, shoes on the street, CC for color correction. And now we have a nice color corrected version and a original version to work off of. Beautiful. Okay, so this one's color corrected and ready to receive grades. So let's go ahead and go back to our project window. Let's take shoes on the street. We'll call this shot 3 _ shoes on the street, and we'll drag that into our comps folder, and we will also put it on our main composition so that now we've got all 3 of our shots on our main composition. Let's move on to the next shot. So let's see, couple walking on beach. Let's do that one. All right, so grab couple walking on beach. This shot is 26 seconds long. So again, we're going to double click on this one, and we're going to scrub into our footage to find our favorite 10 seconds. Just kind of scrubbing over this to see what it looks like. I like the end of this footage a lot because we get the clouds and the sky up there. So I'm going to set an out point at 22 seconds, and I'm going to set my in point at 12 to give me a nice 10-second composition. And then we're going to drag couple walking on the beach onto our little composition tab to create a new composition from that footage. Now this is the one 4K shot that we have in our collection of shots. So I'm going to go ahead and set this to fit to the screen, and I'm going to cut the resolution down to 1/4 just so I can work really quickly and I can see all the parts of the image that are important. Okay, so this shot is going to be a little bit more difficult to balance because we don't really have really great representations of lights and darks inside of our image. This is probably one that we could balance out pretty quickly with Lumetri. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add Lumetri onto my first footage. Actually, we'll do the duplicate first. So let's duplicate the footage on the timeline. We'll create our original on the bottom, and then our color corrected version on top of that. So original on the bottom, color corrected on top of that. And then make sure we've got our color corrected version selected, and we'll go ahead and add Lumetri to that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and add Lumetri to color corrected, and I'm going to go into basic correction, and then let's go ahead and white balance this image. And I think we can probably pull white off those clouds on the far right hand corner of the screen. That looks like really the best representation of white in the whole screen. So let's go over there and use our eyedropper to have that balance our image out. And that did a really nice job. You can see that the parades line up really nicely, and we can start working the grade on this a little bit.
If you go to like the back end of the footage, you get a brighter white.
Cool. Yeah, and it looks like it's pretty close across the board. I'll reset and pull from over here anyway. Yeah, that's nice. Looks good.
Yeah.
Cool. Alright, so we've got our white balance kind of selected. I'm looking at so we have little itty bitty tiny spots of black in here. Like her skirt that she's wearing is probably the best spot of black that we have. So you can kind of see on the parades where those little dots are lining up. So we can kind of use that to balance out the dark areas in this image, but it's going to be a little tricky. So what I'm doing is I'm moving the footage way over to the right, and I'm really just going to be utilizing the parades and looking at those little blips of black that we're seeing on the image. I'm going to set this to full resolution just so that we can see really good representations of those dark areas in the image. And it looks like the only thing we really need to do is pull the blues down a little bit. So I'm going to go into the curves section of Lumetri, go to the blue channel, and then I'm going to grab the lower left hand corner of the blue channel, and I'm just going to pull that down so that it starts to hug that 10% line, and it looks like everything is lining up pretty nicely. It wasn't a very drastic change, but it just balanced it out nicely. Let's see what that looks like before and after. Yeah, that's good. Good, so if you toggle Lumetri on and off, you can see that the parades in the white are nice and lined up, and you can see the parades in the dark areas are also nice and lined up, and we can continue working this shot a little bit more. So we definitely need to pull some contrast in this shot because it's got, you can see that the black areas of the image got some ways to go before they're buried. So let's go ahead and give this some nice contrast using our basic corrections. So I'm just going to go into the contrast, and I'm going to push the contrast until we start to see those areas of black peek out on the bottom, and then those highlights are popping up into the high in the IRE scale up here on the between 90 and 100. I'm actually going to push those highlights a little higher, just so we have a really nice contrasty shot, and that's looking really good. So here's our before and after original footage versus our corrected footage. And I'm going to push the black areas up just a little bit so that we don't have anything that's totally crushed. And it looks like if I go back into my curves, I can push the blue channel up a little bit to balance out those white areas a little on the top parade. So I'm just looking at the parades again and just kind of balancing everything out and moving around Lumetri to give me a nice balanced shot. Yeah, it looks really good. Cool. So there we go. We got some good color correction there. Let's shove off to our next shot and color correct that one. So I'm going to go back to my project window. I'm going to name couple walking on the beach is going to be shot 4_ couple walking on the beach. I'm going to go ahead and grab that shot and pull it into the comps folder, and I'm also going to add it into my main comp so that we can just keep building this project up as we go. Okay, let's see. We've got building above the clouds is corrected and graded, motorcycle is corrected, shoes on the streets corrected.
The last two.
We need the last two. So smiling girl in the snow, which is 9 seconds long. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump that onto a new composition. So grabbing that shot, putting in a new composition, and we can start grading this one. So we're going to go through the same workflow. We're going to call this original. We're going to duplicate that original and call this one CC for color correction. Now this one is definitely going to be a little more tricky than the other ones that we've seen because we've got a really good, it looks like we have a pretty good black area right here which we can balance with. But man, this shot has got not a lot of highlights in it. There's some highlights down here in the lower right hand corner that we can probably use to balance, but this might be one that's a little bit more subjective. Oh, the other nice thing is this has a beautiful fade to white at the end of it and then a fade to black, so we probably want to skip that part. So I'm going to cut this shot off at, it looks like 7 seconds 21 frames. I'm just going to select both of my shots and do an option right bracket to cut those both off there so we don't have to see that annoying punch to black. And then I'm going to go ahead and set my composition settings to 7 seconds 21 frames so that we don't have any junk at the end of our comp. click OK. There we go. Okay, cool. So let's, I'm kind of digging Lumetri, so let's grab Lumetri again and dump Lumetri on here, and we'll kind of use Lumetri to balance this shot out, make it look good. And it looks like our best bet for sampling highlights and lowlights is probably going to be right here on this last frame. So I'm going to go ahead and dump Lumetri on my color correction version of the shot. And we're going to start very similar to where we did before. So white balance, I'm going to go ahead and grab the white from the lower right hand side of the image. Sort of balanced it out. This one you might just need to use your eye on to see how things balance out, but I would really focus on these dark areas. So like, let's get these peaks on the lower parts of the parade. So like we've got the greens are a little bit lower than the blue and the red. So I'm going to go ahead and go right to curves inside of Lumetri, and I'm going to grab the blue channel. I'm going to pull that blue channel down a little bit to help balance out dark areas of the image. And then I'm going to go over and do the same thing on the red channel and just try to line all those little peaks up with the green. And it should balance out pretty nicely. And it did. You can see we pulled a lot of magenta out of the image, so if you toggle between the two, you can see we pulled a lot of magenta out. If we're balancing for this highlight over in the right hand corner, we probably need to just pull a little bit of blue out and push a little bit of red into it. And it looks like we've balanced out the highlights pretty nicely and the lowlights pretty nicely. And if we flip Lumetri on and off, we can see the difference between the two shots. So we pulled a lot of pink out of it. And this should be a little bit better balanced. To me, it looks like it's a little on the green side, but you know, generally the parades don't lie too much unless you just don't have a really good representation of white in your image or black. So the other thing we could kind of look at is just, you know, subjectively correcting this a little bit. I mean, you could go into curves and go into the green and just pull a little bit out of the midtones, and it honestly starts to look very similar to what we had when we started. That looks pretty good. Looks pretty nice and balanced. Cool, and then let's go ahead and go into the basic corrections and push some contrast into this. So I'm going to go ahead and push some contrast into this. I don't want to go too crazy because it starts to look pretty muddy if we overdo it. So I'm going to push a little contrast into it, and then I'm going to work with the highlights and the shadows. So I'm going to push the highlights up a little, kind of punch them up to like the 90% zone, and then I'm going to bring the shadows down a little bit as well. Just build some contrast in and see about getting a shot that looks a little more contrasty and natural. Looks nice. Man, this is super compressed stuff. You can see all this gunk that we have in the upper left hand corner, lots of compression artifacting. So I'm going to work the curves on this just a little bit. I'm going to go into the blue channel, and I pulled that down before, but to me it looks like it needs to come up a little bit, and then the reds need to be balanced out a little. That looks better to me. There we go. So quite the change between the two shots. This one looks nicely contrasted, has a little bit more saturation naturally because we've pushed contrast into it. That one's pretty nicely corrected. And let's go ahead and kind of rinse and repeat what we did before. So we'll go back into our project window. We will name this shot 5 _ smiling girl in the snow, and we will drag that into our main comp. This one's a little on the shorter side. If we really wanted to get this out to 10 seconds, we could time remap this and bring it out to 10 seconds. I'm not going to worry too much about it at this point. And I'm going to go ahead and drag that comp into our comps folder, and we'll do the woman with the sunglasses last. The other thing to note is the beach shot that we added before, you're probably going to want to scale that down. So remember that shot's a 4K shot, so we're actually seeing about twice as much as the image as we had before. That was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to do scale 50%. There we go. So I just took the beach shot and scaled it down so that it fits our 1080p comp better. Scaled it by 50%, and then it fits the 1080p comp nicely. All right, and then let's do our last shot. So let's go woman in sunglasses. This is 17 seconds long. Let's go ahead and double click it and set our ins and our outs. Not huge on the dude passing right in front of my shot, but oh well. Yeah, let's just take the I'm just going to take the first 10 seconds of the shot and create a comp from that. So I'm taking the first 10 seconds. I'm going to go ahead and do the shot 6 underscore woman in sunglasses. I'll drop that on my main composition and put it in my comps folder so that I've got everything nicely organized. All right, and now we are ready to correct this one. So this one is drastically different from what we saw before. So this one is nowhere near as flat as some of the images that we saw before, and this one's going to be a little tougher to balance because there's not really great representations of highlights in this, and you know, we could balance to the little white stripes on her shirt. We can try that and see what happens, but there's a lot of kind of manila tones and things like that in here, and you can see that we've got really great dark areas in this already. The darks are already down to 0 IRE. You can see that we've kind of lost a lot of detail in the dark areas in her hair. This shot is honestly pretty well balanced. But let's go ahead and throw Lumetri color on this bad boy and just try to balance it out to the white stripes on her shirt. So I'm going to go into basic correction. I'm going to grab the white balance selector and just run right in on that shot. Let's zoom in here a bit so I can make sure I grab a good spot. There we go. And that kind of gave everything a little bit more of a green cast. I mean, the stripes definitely came back to white, which is good. So I'm gonna roll with that. But if you feel like it's too much, you can just adjust it until it feels right for you guys. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually lift the dark areas of this image up a little bit. And I'm going to work to balance those. They look like they're pretty well balanced right now. I don't really think I'm going to have to do anything to them. So this shot is really close to corrected right out of the gate. Like I didn't need to do too much here with curves and all that good stuff. Okay, so let's go ahead and I should have created my duplicate already. I'm going to call this one color correction, and I'm going to go down to the one on the bottom, call it original, and I'm going to pull the Lumetri color off of that so that I can see the difference between my two shots. Okay, so now we can have fun with some color grades. So let's go ahead and let's go into the motorcycle shot. And let's start playing around with the color grades on the motorcycle shot and playing with some additional ideas of things that you can do with color grades. Go ahead, Connor.
I also missed how you made the couple walking on the beach smaller.
Oh, I just scaled it down. Yeah, so all I did on that one, Connor, was go into the scale and dropped it to 50%.
Oh, okay.
Right, that one's a 4K shot, so I just scaled it down to the 1080p comp. Okay, so motorcycle shot. Let's go into the motorcycle shot and start playing with some additional grading here. All right, cool. So this shot is pretty well balanced now. Everything's looking nice and contrasty. Let's play around with a look for this. So somebody give me an idea for a look. What do you guys want to do with this? DeAndre, what should we do with this? What do you want this to look like?
The motorcycle?
Yeah.
Yeah, we were on this earlier.
Yeah, what do you want it to look like? What should we grade it like? What do we want it to look like? How do we want it to feel?
Oh, okay. How about we make it look like probably more, you know, a motorcycle highway to hell types.
Oh, so okay, so like Highway to Hell type thing. So Hellscape color correction.
Hellscape, yeah, that's
All right, Hellscape color correction. This will be fun. Okay, so let's do similar to what we did before. So we've got a nice color corrected version. Let's go ahead and add an adjustment layer to this. So we're going to go ahead and add an adjustment layer, and we're going to call this grade 1 or grade 2 underscore Hellscape.
Layer new. Wait, what? Like, is it a new layer or?
It's an adjustment layer, my friend.
I forgot. How did you
Should
do
be done
that?
with Mad Max, man.
Layer, adjustment layer.
Oh yeah, it's not showing up. It's only gray.
You have to do a lot to do this.
Oh, there we go.
You have to do almost
All right, so now that we're kind of done balancing everything out, I'm going to move out of the color correction setup, and I'm just going to set it to all panels so that I have all of my fun panels to play with over here. And I want to make sure that I'm on the right shot here, motorcycle on the highway. So we're going to make this look like a hellscape shot. That's the goal, is they're riding the highway to hell. You know, it looks like hell. Hellscape.
Duh.
Ever play Doom? It looks like Doom. Alright, so when I think Hellscape, I think a lot of orange, a lot of fire, a lot of lava, a lot of glowy orange stuff. So I think the first idea that I have is I want to take all these bright white highlights and I want to kind of push them to the orange side. So I'm going to go in and get my color correction wheels going over here. Color correction. I'm going to start with curves and just see what I can do with curves here. So I'm going to add curves to my grade 2 Hellscape, and I'm going to start moving my highlights around and getting them to look more orange. So I'm going to go to the red channel, and I'm going to push red into this, and I'm going to pull blue out. And right away, we get a nice gold look on our highlights. I'm going to go ahead and push in a little more green and a little more red. Like, I'm going to go pretty extreme with this because hell is kind of extreme. That's not as extreme as I wanted to go.
Hey, you could go like light blue because there's different hells.
Yes, there
Yeah,
is.
hell,
That's-
yeah.
Also a frozen
No.
wasteland.
Yeah, north mythology's hell.
There certainly is. There's a lot of craziness.
Have you
Okay.
guys watched your
All right, so
Have you guys
I'm
watched that
pushing the color more towards the orange side of the palette. I'm gonna try a hue saturation here too. So hue saturation. I'm gonna dump this underneath my curves correction that I just did, and I'm gonna play around with the hue wheel just a little bit to see what I can do to kind of help this look a little more hellish. And I'm gonna push a little more saturation into it as well. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. Crazy looking hellscape. Okay, here we go. So I've been using curves and hue saturation and playing around a little bit here just to kind of help this look a little bit more hellish. So when I think hell, I think a lot of oranges and blacks and glowiness. So we're starting to get there, but we probably need to push it a little bit further. So I'm going to keep pushing this a little bit further. Let's just try a straight up orange overlay. So let's go ahead and create a new layer solid. And I'm going to go ahead and grab like a crazy nuclear orange. Like that. And I'm going to try some blending modes. Not screen. That looks like sherbet.
Oh god.
Ooh, hey, there we go. It's starting to go the right way.
What the heck? Did you like? Oh.
I'm just playing around with some blending modes right now.
Try color burn.
What did you do?
That's hard mix.
Yeah, color burn's good. I like that one.
Oh, yeah.
I'm gonna pull it back a little bit,
Where's color burn at?
Is he
like 50, 33%-ish.
Color burn. Color
Starting to look hellscapey.
Oh, now that looks nice. That looks real nice.
Pretty cool. All right. And then I'm gonna go ahead and on my adjustment layer, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna grab a glow. So I'm gonna hit glow, stylize glow, and I'm gonna dump that on my hellscape dilly-mabobber, and I'm gonna start pushing some glow into this thing. Intensity is a little high right now. Back that off by like 50%. I'm going to select a crazy nuclear orange or yellow for the glow color. Let's see, original colors, let's go AB colors. Ooh, yeah, there we go. It's starting to look crazier by the second. Wild.
What the heck?
There we go. Cool. So I'm just playing around with the glow a little bit here. What I'm trying to do is just make the glow kind of come from the white areas of the image. So if I turn that on and off, you can kind of see what it's doing. I changed it on top and now it's just not working. Here we go. Looks like my threshold is
It's not a...
30%.
Hold up.
Show me. I want to see. Oh wow, you can have multiple color loops. Crazy. Oh, that's wild. Wild. Okay. There we go. Now we're kind of getting something that looks a little bit more hellish looking. Freaky looking. That was probably over the top. But you know, hellscapes are kind of over the top, so yeah, and kind of a huge difference between our color corrected footage and then our hellscape grade.
Wait. Okay. Oh, shoot.
Yeah, if we like, you know, tracked some like fire onto this road, it would look pretty sick.
That would?
Oh, it'd be like that also.
Or
with
at
the
least
stage
like
movie.
track it behind the one in front.
So
What
there's
am I,
like fire on behind the guy.
what am I missing?
I'm thinking more like cracks in the road with lava coming out of them.
It's still like...
Put that on.
No, it would be a lot of work.
a lot of glow.
That might be Metroid Prime 3.
So I'm just going to do a couple other just little subtle things to kind of play with this a little bit. I'm going to add one more adjustment layer over the top of this.
What'd you do for your glowing radius?
That's
And I'm just going to call this Sats for saturation. So I'm going to do hue saturation.
See, look at that. Now you get
And I'm just going to oversaturate this a little bit so it gets a little more hellish looking.
Looks like Tron.
Use no, it's all subjective.
And I'm also kind of wondering what it would look like.
Layers that again?
An adjustment layer.
Righto.
I'm also kind of wondering what it would look like if I kind of balanced the blacks out a little bit. So pull.
Okay, well that's where it needs to come out. Get that much more back. No, that's fine.
Interesting. So this is a pretty extreme grade. Very, very, very different from our original footage. But I think it's got a nice kind of hellish feel to it. You could push it further if you wanted to.
Could always be like oratory, but that's close enough.
It's definitely over the top. Cool, okay, so we've got that shot's nicely set up. It's got a color grade on it. Let's go ahead and move on to, let's say, shoes on the street. So let's have a little fun with this one. So this is a pretty monotone shot. There's not a lot of color in it. We've corrected it and balanced it and given it some saturation. Let's just go ahead and work this a little bit and make it a little more bright and fun. Trying to think of how the shot makes me feel. Let's make this look like kind of like a stormy day almost. So let's go ahead and add a new adjustment layer, and we'll call this Stormy. Stormy day grade. I'm going to go ahead and dump curves onto this, and I'm going to push some blue into my shot. And then I'm also going to, it looks like it needs to have a little bit of red pulled out of it, so I'm going to pull out a little bit of red in the middle. It's looking good. And I think it needs to get, like, we need to pull the gamma down. So I think, yeah, so in color correction there's an 8-bit corrector called Gamma Pedestal Gain. Oh, it's all broken out. I don't need that much control. Let's try exposure. So there's a color correction plugin called Exposure. I'm going to dump that on there, and I'm going to kind of like underexpose this a little bit. So I'm going to pull the exposure down and make the shot look a little more muddy. And darker. I'm going to go back to the RGB on the curves and just push black levels up a little bit so we don't lose too much detail in the dark areas of the image. But that's starting to look pretty good. Then I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a vignette to this. So let's go ahead and create a new layer solid. I'm going to do a very dark blue layer solid, so I'm going to go kind of like into the sky blue area of the color wheel, and I'm going to just grab a really dark blue, highly saturated dark blue color. And click OK. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my masks, and I'm going to select the ellipse tool, and I'm going to double click the ellipse tool, and that's going to give me a perfect ellipse selection around my layer solid. And then I'm going to invert it so that I get that selection is on the outside, and then we're going to just click the invert button right next to the mask, and it inverts it. And then I'm going to hit F for feather, and I'm going to feather this out by like 350 pixels. And it gives me a nice dark blue vignette around my shot. And I'm probably going to go into the opacity and just pull the opacity back a little bit. Say like, I'm going to go like 65%. So it's a little more subtle.
The oval there.
So you just select your solid, double click the ellipse selection, and it'll create a perfect ellipse selection for you on your layer.
I see.
and then you just invert that. Fucking around on your phone again?
No, dude, I'm just looking down, being like, what's going on?
Why don't you follow along and do stuff? You know, like you're supposed to do in class.
Yeah.
I forgot how to make a specific area or specific color pop more.
So, how do you mean? Like specific to the image, or just like in general? Like you want to give it a blue tone, or a red tone, or a
'cause,
gold
like,
tone?
There's the yellow on the road. I want to make that like a bit brighter.
Okay, so if you want to make the yellow on the road brighter,
Because I'm going for like a sunny approach.
okay, you're going for a sunny approach. All right, so if you wanted to say make the yellow on the road brighter, you can do that with secondaries. So there's a couple ways that we can do this. Let's try it with standard plugins first. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to shut off the grades that I've put on, Connor, and I'm going to go to the color corrected version, and I'm going to make a new layer, a new adjustment layer. And I'm going to call this Yellow Pop.
Also, I might need 2 custom layers.
And then I think what I'm going to try to do is,
Because I've got an adjustment layer that makes it look like more like it's sunny outside, but I can't get that yellow to pop.
okay, so we're going to try to get that yellow to pop. So I'm actually going to show you that in Lumetri, because I think this could work really, really well. All right, so I don't know if that's going to work on an adjustment layer though. So I think I'm going to delete my adjustment layer, and I'm going to create another version of the color correction. So I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to call this Yellow Pop. And then I'm going to add Lumetri on top of the curves and the levels. And we're going to go into the HSL secondary area. Actually, no, let's go into curves, because I told you that it has this hue saturation curve on it.
Yes.
So if you go into the curves and you go to the hue saturation curve, what you're trying to do is you're trying to single out the yellows, right? So look at my screen for a second, Connor. So here we are in this hue saturation curve. You can actually select the yellows, and it'll lay in 3 dots for you, so that you can push the saturation of the yellows in the image. It's kind of not really going as far as I was hoping it would go.
More orange.
That's definitely not working as well as I was hoping. Alright, so then let's throw that away and try, let's try HSL secondary. So we want to go into the key first. So let's go where it says key, and then where it says set color. Let's grab the eyedropper and select that yellow. And then let's go into add color and go to yellow and just really saturate the crap out of it. See what happens. Let me see what the mask looks like. Okay, good. HSL sliders. Okay, cool. So that all looks good. Refine, denoise, blur, that's good. Correction, this is where we can actually push the saturation. So now, boom, we've got the saturation really popping on that yellow. Did you see how that worked? You want me to go over it again?
Please.
Please and thank you. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start fresh. So I'm going to delete Lumetri. The goal here is to make the yellow on this painted yellow pop, right? So let's go Lumetri color. We'll grab that, dump that onto our color graded footage called Yellow Pop, and then we're going to go into HSL secondary. So this is the thing that allows you to grab specific colors and manipulate them. And then we're going to go into key, and we're going to set the color, right? So we're going to eyedropper the yellow that we want to change. Next, if you say show mask, what it's going to do is it's going to show you the areas of the image that it's selected. It's a lot like Keylight in that way, right? So we're seeing that it's got that yellow paint selected, which is exactly what we want. We could go in and we could say, so the HSL sliders, what those allow you to do is select specific tones, right? So let's say we wanted to change all the trees in a shot orange, like in Oh Brother, Where Art Thou. we could use this very same methodology to do that, where we select the greens of the image and then we control the hue, saturation, and lightness to select all the greens that we want to change, and then with the correction tool down at the bottom, we can change this color to whatever color we want. So I'm going to shut the mask back off. So like if I go down here and I change the tint of that color, you can see that we can now make that yellow any color that we want to make it. You said specifically you want it to like be a brighter, poppier yellow,
Yeah,
right?
like it's fresh.
So we would be working the saturation then. And you can also refine that mask as well. So like if we zoom in here a little bit and we say blur this maybe by like 1 pixel, it's just going to soften the selection up a little bit. And you can denoise it and things like that too, a lot like what you can do in Keylight. And then we can go ahead and we can start saturating that yellow. So if I just push saturation into it, it starts to pop real good. And it looks like it needs to pull in a little bit more of the edges, and that's where you can kind of use these hue saturation sliders to adjust where that selection is falling. So if I say grab okay, so you can see that if I slide the edges on this saturation slider around, you can see the edges start to fan out a little bit more, and it starts to take on a little bit more of that yellow, which is exactly what we want it to do. We could also kind of play with these sliders to adjust and get that key refined so that it does exactly what we want it to do. All right, and then we just push a lot of saturation into it, and it starts to get really yellow and starts to pop. You can also play around with the color wheels, the temperature, the contrast. You can sharpen it, tint it. You can make it like whatever color you want. So if you really want it to pop, you're just going to push the crap out of the saturation, and then anything that's yellow in this image is going to pop. So one of the things you probably want to do here, Connor, hello, are you listening?
Yeah.
Is if you only want it to be the paint up there in the upper left-hand corner,
Throw a mask on.
you want to mask it. Yeah, because what it's going to do is you can kind of see it doing this on her feet right now.
Yeah.
Like there's these areas where you can see that the feet have been oversaturated, and that's the kind of thing you want to avoid with this effect. So you definitely want to you'd want to go through your shot and find the shot where the paint, or parts where the paint comes in, and really only use this yellow pop where you need it and mask it. So you would cut it in where you need it and cut it out where you don't need it. So right there it goes away. Does it come back in at all? No, it doesn't. So I'm going to go ahead and cut that yellow pop off where I don't need it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to mask it as well. So I'm going to go over to where it's kind of fully visible. And I'm just going to create a nice little feathered triangle mask in the corner so that it blends nicely with the other color correction. And I'm going to feather this out by like, let's call it 50, 80 pixels. And now none of that yellow color correction is going to hit any of the spots on her leg that we don't want to be hitting. So if you look at your selection, you can see that we're just controlling the color in that corner. So when you're doing adjustments like that, you just want to be really careful that you're only affecting what you need to affect and not everything. And I'd probably go so far as to like come in here on my mask and set, some path options on it, and just kind of control where this mask is falling.
I mean, I'm not really seeing anything else that it's affecting besides that.
Right. I mean, the only reason that I'm doing that is like if this was a shot where you tilted up and there was other stuff in the background or whatever, it's just good practice to have it only really affect what needs to be affected. And then the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fade this in and fade it out, so it comes in and leaves very, very subtly, so your eye will never pick it up. And after it's gone, we will fade it out. There we go. So boom, we've got the yellow popping now. I'm going to turn on my other corrections and just see.
Oh, that's gonna look gross.
Yeah, it looks gross, but I mean it's still apparent that it did that. And if you wanted yours to look more sunny, and it looks like there's some yellow at the beginning too that I missed. So you could go ahead and mask that too and make that work a little bit better. But that's kind of how to control specific colors. Let's do the same thing on the couple walking on the beach shot. So couple walking on the beach shot. So like let's say we wanted to make the color of the ocean more turquoise, right? We wanted to push the color of the ocean and make it look more beautiful than it does right now. So I'm going to take my color corrected shot. I'm going to do the same thing, right? So I can actually do this because I have Lumetri on this already. I'm just going to go into the HSL secondaries. I'm going to go into my key section and I'm going to pick the turquoise that I want to pick. I'm going to have it show my mask so I can see what we're actually affecting. And I'm going to remove this blue up here in the clouds because I don't want that to be part of my mask. And I'm also going to use this add color to try to add in a little bit more of this blue selection. Alright, so then I'm going to go into my refine matte and I'm going to use, or my correction matte, and I'm going to use, sorry, I'm totally screwing this up, HSL sliders, my bad. And I'm going to work these so that I'm getting the colors that I want to get. And these are really more towards the turquoise side. So if I just take that hue slider and slide it to the left, you can see that all that dark blue in the clouds starts to drop out. So I'm getting rid of that. And now I can kind of like work the saturations a little bit to really start to bring in all of the turquoise that I want to bring in to this shot. I can kind of move these sliders around and really fine tune this selection to get everything that I want to get. And it might be one of these things where I do a little bit of masking on this as well, like duplicate this layer and do a little masking on it so I'm not controlling the blue in the clouds, but I still want to get as much of that ocean color as possible. And then let's go ahead and denoise this a little bit and blur it a little bit so it softens it up. And now we should be able to, punch the saturation and the color on that ocean. So if I want to maybe change the color temperature of it, you can see like if I wanted to make the ocean orange, I could do that. I don't want to make it orange. I kind of want to make it a nice blue color, turquoisey blue color. So I'm just controlling the temperature a little bit. I'm going to push the saturation a little bit more, not over the top, but a little bit more. You can see all those dark areas up there kind of drop off quite a bit. So if we needed to go out there and kind of punch those up, we could. I'm going to blur this out even a little bit more just so it softens all the edges of my selection. And you can play with that temperature to kind of dial it in and get it looking the way that you want it to look, and then you can activate it and deactivate it and see the difference before and after. It's pretty intense. So that water is a lot prettier to look at when we do the HSL secondaries. Subtlety is key on this. I would probably pull the sats down just a little bit so it's not quite excuse me, quite so punchy. Now that looks really nice. And I think the last thing that I would do is I would probably duplicate this color correction, and I would call this Ocean CC, and then basically just deactivate it in the color corrected version. And then I can mask this ocean color on the top so that I'm not grading the clouds out there. I don't want to grade the clouds. I just want to grade the turquoise ocean. So I'm going to go ahead and just make this rectangle selection, just kind of select out the clouds, and then I'm going to add just a little bit of a feather to it, call it 20 pixels, and I'm going to invert that selection so that it's just working on the ocean itself. So if I kind of show you before and after of this, you can see that the clouds are not affected, only the ocean is, and it brings a nice color pop into that water. All right.